Good evening, everyone. Welcome. As you're joining, feel free to put in the chat your name, pronouns if you feel comfortable, and where you're calling from. We'll let people trickle in. Welcome, everyone. If you're just joining, please feel free to drop your name and where you're calling from in the chat. We want to be able to welcome everyone. All right, I'm going to go ahead and get started as folks are still coming in. Thank you for joining IEC for our Zero Waste Town Hall. My name is Gabby Plotkin. I'm a Senior Policy Manager focusing on waste and water here at IEC, and I'm excited to be your host tonight. For a few housekeeping items, as I mentioned, please continue to put your name, where you're calling from, pronouns if you're comfortable in the chat so we can welcome you. Please note that we are recording this town hall and it'll be posted on our YouTube page. So if you're not comfortable being on camera, no worries. It should only capture though the person who is speaking for the recording. Everyone is muted as you enter, and I invite you to stay muted through our presentations. As you have questions and comments, please feel free to drop them in the chat throughout our presentations. We'll have a question and answer section at the end. If you're joining by phone, you can use *9 to raise your hand towards the end when we get to questions. And I just invite everyone to, use our values of respect and bring energy to this conversation. We have a lot of exciting things coming up in 2026 that we want to cover. So we definitely want to stick to that material. Great. So before I kick it off to our keynote speaker, I just wanted to remind everyone why we're here. So Illinois Environmental Council, as many of you know, this is our 50th year, our 50th anniversary. So we're celebrating a lot of environmental progress throughout that time. And our mission is all about building power for people in the environment. So that's really what our work is grounded in. We cover 6 different issue areas, including zero waste, and we represent over 130 environmental organizations on policy within Illinois. So thank you to all of you who are here tonight, who are helping represent those groups and do that great work. So framing a little bit the conversation, we all know that waste is a big problem globally and here in Illinois. 19 million tons of waste are landfilled every year, which contribute to greenhouse gas emissions. They squander our valuable resources, and they inequitably impact our neighbors. This is an environmental justice issue. You'll see some numbers on the screen that are some of the biggest pieces that alarm us about just the mass of emissions, landfills, and plastics that we unfortunately have to deal with here in Illinois in the Midwest. And we have a chance to really change that, to be able to reduce our reliance on these plastics, to divert some of these renewable resources out of the landfill and bring them back into our circular economy. And now I'd like to pass the mic over to Representative Gong Gershowitz, who is our keynote speaker here tonight. It is my privilege to introduce her. She received 100% on IEC's 2025 legislative scorecard and is the chief sponsor on the polystyrene foam ban and Skip the Stuff, bills to eliminate single-use plastics here in Illinois. So please take it away.
Thank you so much, Gabby, and good evening, everyone. It's great to be with you virtually. So I'm Jennifer Gong Gershowitz. I'm the state representative for the 17th district. So I represent Northern Cook County suburbs from Skokie and Evanston west to Glenview and Northbrook. I'm also a member of the Green Caucus, and I really learned my environmental common sense through my mother, who was engaged in the environmental movement back in the 60s. I think she gave voice to the need to protect our planet long before we had sort of a political space to do that advocacy. And so I've been engaged in this work really my whole life, whether I knew it or not. And as a member of the General Assembly, I've carried a number of important bills to reduce plastic waste. The most notable of those has been our fight to eliminate the use of polystyrene foam in the state of Illinois, starting with the bill that I passed. I was at Andrea a couple sessions ago, which started with banning polystyrene foam in state governments, and that includes universities and schools. And I also passed out of the House that same year a complete ban on the use of polystyrene foam in single-use foodware, but then it stalled in the Senate. We came back this last year, passed it out of the Senate, and now I'm working to get the votes in the House. And I think what we've seen is that sometimes it takes more than one session to make progress on these issues. And because so many things right now seem under attack, whether it's just our, literally and figuratively being gaslit over the need to address climate change, to reducing plastic. Here in Illinois, I think we still have the opportunity to lead on this issue. I'm committed to this fight. I've passed this bill now, I think 3 times, and I need 60 votes in the House to get it over the finish line. This next session, it does not have to go back to the Senate. I actually passed a tougher version of this bill. The original version of this bill did not have a 5-year window to implement. That was something that we worked on in order to get it across the finish line in the Senate. So we are really at the point now where we're just needing to get those last handful of votes. So your advocacy is critically important to get those last holdouts on board. Make sure that I can get this through. I think right now the target is April to put it on the board in the House. And like I said, I passed it before. Fully expect to get a win this year. The other bill that I've been working on with respect to plastic reduction is the Skip the Stuff bill. That bill passed out of the House with a supermajority. And what that bill does is really simple. It just says it requires that those third-party delivery restaurant services like Uber Eats and DoorDash make plastic utensils available by request only. It does have an enforcement mechanism in it. I think a lot of us have drawers full of plastic we didn't ask for. I'd like to keep those out of landfills. It passed the House and got stuck in the Senate. Not sure why, because there's no opposition to that bill. So that's one that I really like to see get across the finish line in the Senate, given that it has no opposition. The foam foodware ban does have opposition, as any ban does, but I think we all understand on this call the importance of starting with the worst of the worst and banning the use of polystyrene foam in foodware, because we know that it's not only bad for the environment, but it's bad for your health. I mean, children should just simply not be drinking or eating out of styrofoam. So that's kind of, my high level update on where we're at with plastic reduction in the state of Illinois. two big bills I could use your help with this year. And thank you all for remaining committed to this fight when we all have so many things that are on our plate these days. Every day brings a new issue, I think, to the forefront in terms of fighting for the core values that we all believe in. And I cannot thank you enough for the work that you all do every day to make sure that the planet is something that does not end up being on the chopping block in terms of the things that we fight for here in Illinois, at least as we're seeing our federal partners withdraw from the progress that we've made. Illinois can have an outsized impact. We're a large economy. We are a large state. So if we can lead here, others will follow. So with that, I will pass it back to Gabby for your next speaker.
Thank you so much, Representative Gongershowitz. We really appreciate your leadership on this. And you too can take action on this and help ask your legislators to support these bills. I dropped our action alert in the chat, and we can definitely connect you offline if you're not already involved in our plastics work. I also want to invite you to check up on your legislators, whether they scored 100% and will be supporting our bills with IEC's legislative scorecard that I invite you to peruse throughout the night and take home with you as well. So I'm going to invite up our next speakers. We have two wonderful panelists experts tonight to speak about different areas of zero waste. Our first speaker will be Andrea Dencham, who's a senior policy advisor to Alliance for the Great Lakes, speaking about plastics. And our next speaker will be Caroline French, who's a sustainability program coordinator at 7 Generations Ahead. So thank you. Please welcome with some applause our speakers, and I'll hand it over to you, Andrea.
Thank you so much, Gabby. And you just heard from the representative how critically important it is for us to work together to act, and the role that Illinois can play in taking action. And I think I'm here right now in the Alliance for the Great Lakes office, and I've been meeting all week with some of our colleagues from across the country who work on reducing waste and preventing plastic pollution. And I can tell you how important our region is, and especially the state of Illinois. So each of you tonight, before you go, and in fact, while I start talking, make sure you take action and share that. If you can tonight, share that action alert with 5 friends, put it up on your social media, but we want to keep the drum going, and we want to make sure we can get especially the styrofoam foodware and skip the stuff across the finish line next year. You can do next slide. Clearly, the Alliance for the Great Lakes is committed and dedicated to preventing plastic from finding its way into the Great Lakes, but also protecting the Great Lakes for generations to come. You can go to the next slide. And when we work on, I don't know if I have control over, or do you, Gabby, have? There you go. Thank you. And so those of us who live near and care about the Great Lakes, one of the things we want to do.
Well, it seems like we might have lost Andrea momentarily, so we'll give her a second to come on back. I think in the meantime, we might have Caroline take it away, talking about organics and other issues related to zero waste, and we'll have Andrea come back on when her technical issues are resolved. So thank you for being nimble, Caroline.
Of course. Thank you so much, Gabby. And thank you for inviting me to speak today. My name is Caroline French, as she said, and I work as a sustainability program coordinator at 7 Generations Ahead in Oak Park, Illinois. I'm here tonight to discuss some urgent legislative priorities around organics diversion and methane emissions reduction in Illinois. Next slide, please. Before we dive in, I wanted to give you a bit of background on my involvement in this work. 7 Generations Ahead is a nonprofit organization focused on collaboration and local action. For over 20 years, we have worked with communities to drive solutions related to climate, equity, and sustainability. The issue of food waste is a big one, but it's something we can tackle together to create a more sustainable future for the next generations. Through my work at SGA, I have the privilege of participating in other groups focused on reducing wasted food, both as a co-chair of the Young Professionals Group of the Illinois Food Scrap and Composting Coalition and as a co-facilitator of the Wasted Food Action Alliance. Next slide, please. I'll kick it off with an alarming fact. The single largest source of methane emissions in Illinois is our landfills. This is a severe issue. Methane is a potent short-term superpollutant that possesses over 80 times the warming power of carbon dioxide in the first 20 years. And wasted food is driving this issue. Food scraps make up only 20% of all landfilled waste, yet they're responsible for 58% of methane emissions coming from those landfills. Beyond the environmental crisis, the numbers reveal a massive economic and resource loss. Up to 40% of all food is wasted in the US. This means that a family of 4 could save up to $56 a week by reducing their food waste. The data is clear here, and the problem requires urgent legislative action. My focus today is on the solution. 2 key bills, Senate Bill 1397 and House Bill 1707/Senate Bill 1398, and how they lay the groundwork for a more resilient Illinois. It is so exciting that these bills continue to remain a priority for policy organizers, affiliates, and members of the IEC. Thank you all for keeping this essential work moving forward. Next slide, please. To solve a problem this big, we need a solution that's going to deliver in 3 ways. A win for our climate, a win for the economy, and a win for the people. A win for our climate looks like reducing our methane emissions directly, and we can do that by diverting our organics. Then the resulting compost added to our soils increases carbon sequestration, which is also key to fighting climate change. A win for our economy would look like more jobs. A report on a similar bill out of Massachusetts found that the food waste ban created over 1,600 well-paying jobs and over $194 million in economic value. A similar study is currently being conducted by the NRDC on the impact in Illinois. A win for our people looks a little different. It looks like significant increases in food donations, which is what we need right now. This is a food security initiative. Did you know that 1 in 8 Illinoisans are food insecure and 1 in 6 are children? States with similar policies enacted have seen significant increases in food donations. I'd like everyone to take a moment to consider the impact that edible food rescue can make. With these bills, we have the opportunity to ensure that high-quality, edible food is feeding our neighbors instead of feeding the landfill and fueling climate change. These bills are essential in Illinois, not only for diverting food from landfills, but for feeding those who need it. Next slide, please. So the first and arguably most direct attack on landfill methane is House Bill 1707/Senate Bill 1398, the Food Recovery and Diversion Bill. This bill starts by establishing a clear food scrap hierarchy, preventing wasted food, donating, using an animal feed, or finally compost or anaerobic digestion. The key here is the gradual implementation. This isn't something that's going to happen overnight. It'll start with the largest commercial generators in 2029, and it'll gradually lower the threshold over years, with the requirement only kicking in if a generator is within a set radius, initially starting at 20 miles of an authorized compost or AD facility. This is a phased and data-driven policy. It also will remove regulatory barriers by amending the definition of a pollution control facility to exempt food scrap processing facilities. This amendment is super important for us to be able to expand the necessary infrastructure to process our food scraps. Next slide, please. The second bill is Senate Bill 1397, the Compost and Digestate Market Development Bill. This is a market building bill. We can't divert organics if we don't have a place for them to go. And this bill addresses that by providing grant funding to offset the cost of purchasing, transporting, and applying compost on agricultural land. Crucially, it'll also allocate funding for the University of Illinois to study the benefits of compost on soil health and crop resilience. Now, these bills are subject to change as stakeholders are still convening to get the best versions of these bills for all of Illinois. Next slide. I think it's important to note that these efforts don't happen in a vacuum. The momentum for these bills comes from organizations across our state. Here, I have two Illinois groups that each bring diverse stakeholders together to impact change within our food system. The Illinois Food Scrap and Composting Coalition works to advance policy and infrastructure for composting in Illinois while educating about the value of food scrap composting and the use of finished compost. The Wasted Food Action Alliance formed a few years after the IFSCC with the goal to build connections across the food supply chain to address prevention, food rescue, and food scrap recycling. Many IFSCC members were a part of forming the Wasted Food Action Alliance and still continue to be active members of both groups. Next slide, please. These groups demonstrate the power of collaboration. Our IFSCC sustaining members represent exactly the diverse group of stakeholders we need. Haulers, processors, nonprofits, and businesses, all working towards the best food system we can have. Thank you to our 2025 IFSCC sustaining members for supporting the compost movement. Next slide, please. Now, these bills get us a mandate, but I believe it's education that will help to ensure long-term success. Educating those around us is how we ensure that our policy efforts not only stick, but create a culture that values food, reduces waste, and demands a climate-friendly circular system. The IFSCC Policy Committee has been working hard to schedule compost facility tours where members have the opportunity to learn about the process of composting and what the infrastructure really looks like across our state. The picture here is at Midwest Organics Recycling in McHenry, Illinois, where we had the privilege of touring this summer. The IFSCC Education Committee also continues to hold monthly working group meetings to develop educational materials and further climate education with accessible resources on food waste reduction and composting in Illinois. As climate education will be required curriculum in all Illinois public schools, we also have the opportunity to educate and engage students. 7 Generations Ahead and IFSCC have been key partners in the development of the Illinois Climate Education Hub. While the Feed and Conserve bills tackle the infrastructure and the policy, climate education is the long-term solution that addresses the issue systematically. It prepares our future generations, our customers, our business owners, our future policymakers to understand the link between our plate, our waste, and our planet. Next slide, please. We have come such a long way since the start of IFSCC in 2012. Today, over 80 municipalities in Illinois offer compost services to their residents. This number has risen from just 2 municipalities in 2012. The Feed and Conserve Illinois movement is so important to furthering our progress in reducing wasted food, feeding our neighbors, and reducing methane emissions coming from our landfills. Currently, our sponsors are refining the legislation with the goal of filing an amendment before the 2026 legislative session. We need your support to make this happen. If you want to be a part of this movement and help Illinois lead the Midwest in climate-smart food policy, please visit feedandconserveil.org to join us, subscribe to updates, and lend your support to the movement. Thank you all for your time today.
Thank you, Caroline, so much for telling us about the Feed and Conserve movement, about what we can do and how we can take action, and what's happening at the policy landscape at the state level. We really appreciate it. Please continue to put your questions in the chat for Caroline, and we will get to them at the end. I'd now like to pass it back to Andrea to talk to us about plastics work.
Thank you so much. Sorry for disappearing on everyone. And really an honor to be able to talk with everyone tonight. And thanks for taking the time to join us. As you heard from the representative, it is a critical time for us to be working on plastic pollution. And as I was saying at the beginning, our region is really, really important, and especially the state of Illinois. The Alliance for the Great Lakes collects data from our cleanups called Adopt a Beach. We work in partnership with Ocean Conservancy. We have a member from Ocean Conservancy joining us tonight. And as we've done that, we've trying to really be able to nail down the impact of what those cleanups are finding and what kind of policy solutions should come out of it. From that data from over 20 years, and more than 14,000 cleanups, we note that 86% of the litter collected in the Great Lakes is plastic, right? So the vast majority of the litter that we're finding in the Great Lakes is plastic, and that more than 22 pounds, just as Gabby said earlier, of plastics enter the Great Lakes each year. And our colleagues at University of Toronto have noted that the amount of microplastics in surface water in the Great Lakes is actually higher than the plastic concentrations in the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. So it clearly is a problem. And also to note, as you see in the photo in this slide, we get our drinking water, as many of you know, many of us get our drinking water from Lake Michigan. And so protecting those Great Lakes from pollution ending up in there in the first place, going upstream to find source reduction solutions is critically important. Next slide. And also important for us to note is the impact that plastic and plastic pollution can have on human health. So in our region in particular, one thing that's unique is that we both manufacture the plastic. We are part of the original creation of some of the chemicals and petrochemicals that are involved in the creation of plastic. And we have really high levels of waste that come and litter that have plastic pollution in it. So we need to find solutions that reduce the amount of plastic that's being produced, as well as reducing litter. We've found with increasing studies over the last decade or more that the impacts of plastic in its production can really have devastating impacts on the health and well-being of communities. It also has disproportionate harm on those communities that live near those factories or work in those factories. They're having even higher concentrations of the really toxic elements. For example, as we were just talking about foam foodware is often made out of styrene, and styrene is a known carcinogen. So if you're working in a factory that's making foam foodware or you're living near one, there is concern that you might have higher concentrations of things like cancer or endocrine disruptors. So addressing this early and moving towards more sustainable solutions is critical. Next slide. And we also, as we're having a national discussion about the healthcare costs, it's also important to understand what happens if there are negative health outcomes for our community members. What does that mean to our public health costs and the cost to all of us as taxpayers? Well, a recent study identified that more than $250 billion are health costs related to chemicals in plastics, right? So if we're able to reduce the amount of chemicals and toxic elements that are made in the manufacturing process, we're going to keep people healthier, and we're going to save costs by not having to treat really devastating health issues. The quote on the right-hand side, I think, really gets to the issue of us trying to go upstream, find good solutions, and reduce the cost burden on our communities. And as we're having a really robust conversation about our healthcare system, one way to make our healthcare system more robust and resilient is to reduce the amount of unnecessary negative health outcomes. So next slide. So we've established that plastic pollution is bad. We have established that plastic pollution is a major issue here in the Great Lakes. That in fact, 8 out of the top 10 of the most common items in our cleanups are single-use plastic. And I think it's also really important to think about the beautiful aquatic life that live in our Great Lakes. And there are more than 13,000 marine species and freshwater species, and those are impacted by plastic pollution. And as I described a minute ago, because we're part of the manufacturing supply chain, if we're able to remove those fossil chemicals and those petrochemicals out of it, we're also going to have an impact positively on climate change. We're going to be able to reduce the amount of climate impact that potentially can have. More also importantly, and I think this is important if you're talking to your neighbors about this issue, there's been polls recently trying to find out whether or not our neighbors are really interested in these issues. The fact of the matter is they are. In fact, 80% of US voters support state and local policies to reduce single-use plastic. So what are the kind of solutions that we can move towards? Well, preventing the worst of the worst from being created in the first place and keeping them out of our waterways, right? Basin-wide strategies, basin-wide, I mean Great Lakes-wide strategies to monitor and evaluate the amount of plastics that are there so that we can see, and if we do that on an ongoing basis, so we can see if our source reduction efforts are actually having an impact in our waterways. And then systemic investments to make sure that we're moving towards more sustainable, less toxic solutions. I also just want to note that on our website at the Alliance for the Great Lakes is a really great report that we did last year on the 20 years of Great Lakes litter. And it's a nice place to look to both for data about that litter, but we also have a number of solutions there. So I encourage all to look. So next slide. So when I talked a little bit ago about strategies for monitoring and evaluation of water, the Great Lakes are really important to not only us in Illinois, but everyone across the basin and our colleagues in Canada. And so we have binational agreements in order to keep our Great Lakes clean and healthy and vibrant. One recommendation that one of the binational entities called the International Joint Commission came out with in January with and these recommendations were created by a host of binational scientists, was for us to establish a way for us to monitor our drinking water consistently, annually, and over time, and using the same measurements across all Great Lakes states and even with our colleagues in Canada. This seems like the most simple and reasonable thing to do. It's just not something we're doing right now. And without evaluating that, without us using standardized measures, it's really hard for us to know what the state of the state is with our water and to better understand how much plastic pollution is there and then what kind of impacts our policy solutions are going to be having moving forward. So our friends in the state of Michigan have 2 bills that have been introduced related to this. We're hoping in Illinois to be able to introduce similar bills in the coming year. So stay tuned, but we really hope to be able to move forward with a pretty standard, simple and reasonable solution of monitoring our Great Lakes and finding much better data about the quality of our drinking water. Next slide. Another solution is preventing the worst of the worst. So clearly the top priority for us next year is getting the foam foodware ban across the finish line. We absolutely need to do that. And skip the stuff absolutely is a reasonable, sensible way for us to reduce some of the most annoying pieces that come in your to-go foodware, right? We can do that and we can do that quickly, but we all need your support and your effort and you talking to your neighbors and friends, especially this fall and winter as you go through Thanksgiving and the holidays. Please talk to them and encourage them to contact your elected official to make sure we can get foam foodware across the finish line. We also have other ways that we can reduce some of the worst of the worst and reduce plastic pollution at its source. So plastic bags, microbeads. Our colleagues in Michigan also have a brand new microbead ban that expands the number of items and products. That's another reasonable solution for us to move forward. The other issue that we've talked a lot about and had recent bills on were industrial pellets. Some people call them nurdles. Because we make plastic here and we make the basic components for it, we actually have manufacturing of nurdles in the state of Illinois, and we need to make sure that those don't find their way into a wastewater system, into our streams and lakes. And the other thing that we can do is continue to support across the basin things that we have already passed here in Illinois. So hotel bottle bill and water refilling stations and the state procurement single-use plastic bills. So those bills are now law. The last two items you saw there are actually things that we have successfully passed in the state of Illinois. And they're things that we're encouraging right now for our friends in other states to be able to move forward. You can go to the next slide. And the last thing is the systemic and long-term solutions. And that includes extended producer responsibility. This means holding producers responsible for the products that they make and moving them towards source reduction, ensuring that there's environmental, social, and economic mechanisms to hold them accountable. We in Illinois passed a bill to establish the Illinois needs assessment, and I have the honor, along with one of my colleagues from the Coalition for Plastic Reduction, to sit on that statewide body. It is in the midst of doing a needs assessment right now, and our hope is throughout next year for more data to be able to come out, and for that to prepare us for 2027 to be able to introduce a bill around extended producer responsibility. This is a long process, but it's a really important one. Our colleagues in Minnesota, in fact, the representative that passed that bill in Minnesota is here in Illinois right now. And we really, really want to make sure that we can take the smart and really well-designed work of the extended producer responsibility bill in Minnesota and the examples across the country, apply it here in Illinois with really solid data that we're collecting in the needs assessment, and move forward with a solid bill of which we hope to become law. You can go to the next slide. Which is that I just want to thank you all. Thanks for being here tonight. I also want to leave you with one last piece, which is that over the last 3 years, we've been able to pass 10 pieces of legislation to reduce plastic pollution just in Illinois alone. So each of you have the opportunity and the power to help us continue to move forward and have a really amazing impact in our community. You should be proud of the work that you've helped us do to date and now we have a whole bunch more work to do in the coming year. So we look forward to you all rolling up your sleeves, joining us in Springfield, and having more wins in the coming year. Thank you so much, Gabby, and thank you, IEC, for allowing me to join.
Thank you, Andrea. Let's have some round of applause. We really appreciate that presentation and framing and grounding in our work for where we're at with plastics in Illinois, and from a Great Lakes focus as well of what other states are doing and what we can do here to be champions in that work. Oops. So next, we have the opportunity for a little bit of Q&A. And I know we do not yet have questions in the chat, so please, as you're thinking about them, feel free to add them. But in the meantime, would like to just make sure people know that when it is your chance to unmute, if you're calling from the phone, you can use *9 to raise or lower your hand and *6 to mute or unmute. And if you're on Zoom, you can use the raise hand function as well to ask a question. But in the meantime, I'd love if our panelists, and we can start with Caroline, could talk a little bit more about the connection to environmental justice. Why is waste an environmental justice issue? And how do you look at your topic or bills that you're talking about from that frame? Caroline?
Yeah, sorry. I'm just thinking for a second. I think that reducing our waste is sorry, one second.
That's okay. We'll go to Andrea to talk about this first.
Absolutely. This is actually one issue that I'm really deeply passionate about. And you heard me talk about how in Illinois and in other Great Lakes states, we manufacture we manufacture plastic, but we also create some of the petrochemical, so in refining oil, but also in the creation of some of the chemicals themselves. Dow is headquartered in our neighboring state in Michigan, and we have chemical factories across the state of Illinois. We also have manufacturing for things like foam and polystyrene. We have other manufacturing of plastic containers. And so anyone who lives near or works in one of these factories is exposed to the chemicals. And just as I described earlier, some of those chemicals like styrene are known carcinogens. So if you or a family member is working in one of those factories, it increases your likelihood that you may have experience a really terrible chronic disease, something like cancer, diabetes, endocrine disruptors. Even if you live near one of those factories, the air and the water you breathe, the air you breathe, the water you drink could be contaminated from them. So if we move away from these petrochemicals that we're using to make plastics and things like foam foodware, we can reduce the healthcare damages and burden on these communities. We can really change the equation, which right now is resulting in disproportionate harm to those folks who are working in and living near. And we can build a more sustainable future for everybody. So it's a win-win-win when we move away from the worst of the worst toxins. And the last piece I'll say is we often talk about this. I'm talking about the upstream pieces right now, but then when all of these pieces disintegrate, they end up in landfills often. And those landfills are in low-income communities, near low-income communities as well. And so they also have the impacts on the waste side. So if we address this issue, we move towards more sustainable solutions, and we move towards reuse, which is something I didn't talk enough about, but it's something that absolutely we can do. It's a great innovation and something that I think we should be thinking about. Then we're going to be reducing the harm that right now is impacting some of our communities across our region.
Sorry about that. I can jump in right off that and touch on the fact that pollution control facilities are definitely releasing a lot of emissions and are very harmful to the communities that are surrounding them. I also think that the inequity of access to food is a huge problem in environmental justice. As I said earlier, 1 in 8 people are food insecure, and these are often concentrated in predominantly low income neighborhoods, and living near pollution sources often compounds these issues, and more people struggle with access to food and being subject to those emissions.
Thank you both. I wanted to touch on a point made in the chat about new technologies approaching whether it's landfills, or we could also expand this to recycling and plastics. And I wanted to know a little bit of each of your perspectives on how are you talking about or thinking about in your coalitions and movements, maybe approaches to new technologies, and yeah, just approaches to new technologies. And on that point, should we be getting back to the main ideas of whether it's reuse or source reduction, as opposed to that, or are you embracing it? What is that looking like in your work?
I'll jump in, and we were just having a discussion today about advanced recycling, sometimes called chemical recycling. It's utilization, sometimes of pyrolysis and other items, incredibly ineffective, very costly. New technology coming around, always supposed to be the thing that's going to solve the plastics problem, often causes much worse pollution, but incredibly costly. They often ask for states and municipalities to help them pay the way for this new technology that never actually comes fully to fruition. And when it does, it actually results in even more toxins. So like really going upstream for us, really thinking about what true sustainable solutions are, right? Not allowing greenwashing to be happening, us being able to be articulate about why technologies don't work. And when they say they have the magic, super thing that's going to come and solve everything, it's really worth digging into the economics behind it too, as well as the impact on local communities. Often the economics don't add up at all. And there's decades and decades of proof that it doesn't work, or at least years and years. And so I think it's important for us to be able to ask them to be accountable about both the impact that it has on EJ communities, on our environment and our health, as well as what the real true economic impacts are for our region, at a time where we have really tough state budgetary issues, often caused by some federal issues. The last thing we need to do is investing in made up science. So I think we need to be able to do that. And the last thing I'll say about this is that's where our partners who are scientists are a real ally for us. And I think fronting them as much as we can, having them describe this is really important.
Yeah, I think I'll just echo that. I know I mentioned earlier that the bills do call for some more research and understanding around how compost is good for the soil. And I know that anaerobic digestion facilities are newer to the scene, and the bill does support those, which is very exciting that new infrastructure is being built. But I think that one way to assist with this is to make some more regulations and make sure that all the compost sites and anaerobic digestion facilities encourage efficient and advanced processing technologies in the Illinois market.
Thank you both. Yeah, I think this is a space that advocates have to be loud in talking about, asking questions. What does this really mean when we hear terms about new technologies? What are the potential benefits and drawbacks so that we can make the right choice, and educating our policymakers so that they can put the right regulations in place. So thank you both for those perspectives. I'm going to close us with a question from looking at a little bit of a different scale, thinking about the federal level. For either panelist, how can we engage our congressional delegation to potentially lead on waste issues at the federal level? And what talking points are most helpful when describing state issues that are impacting Illinois, but could be talked about in Washington?
So I think this is one of those, we're in the midst of a time where actually the states are going to be leading the way here. And I think it's sometimes it's the other way around, right? We have federal government doing some leadership work and helping to fund things at the state level, like that happened with the IRA. But right now, in terms of legislation and regulation, a lot of that is coming out of the states. And I think we're going to be able to advance farther, better for the next few years. And I think, Kate, to your point, I think it's really important illustrating what we've been able to do. So in the space that we work in, being able to say, hey, look, our colleagues in Minnesota were able to pass an EPR bill. We're working on one in Illinois, and I know our colleagues in Michigan are also working on that. And we know that the Great Lakes delegation knows each other, works really closely with each other, and cares a lot about preventing plastic pollution in the Great Lakes. Similarly, that monitoring bill that I was talking earlier about is something that actually could happen at the federal level. In fact, IJC is a body that has representatives from the federal government of the United States and Canada. And since we've had the states and the state legislatures, the binational groups that support them, approve referendum in support of this, like we are now getting some momentum. So one is, I think, illustrating the bills that have already passed and become law in the Great Lakes Basin, and encouraging our legislative colleagues to have conversations with their state colleagues, and maybe even, and this is just a suggestion for IEC and everybody else who's on this phone, but having next year some meetings on topics where the state legislature representatives and our congressional representatives are both there, and having a dialogue so that we can have some of the state folks sharing with the federal folks some success stories, and maybe empowering them and encouraging them to engage in moving forward. Just a few thoughts.
Yeah, I think painting the big picture is a very important piece there. I know reducing methane emissions is a shared national goal, and Illinois working to address this issue will provide more data and more research around it that will just echo what we already know that other people will still be building on and learning about. Um, I'll end there.
Well, thank you both to both of our panelists, Andrea and Caroline. We really appreciate your time and your insights, and we invite further questions later as we continue to develop our policy priorities and bring them into the new year. I want to thank everyone for coming tonight. And remind you that this is a part of a series of IEC's town halls on several different issue areas. So tonight was our zero waste, and I hope you'll continue to join us throughout the coming weeks at our policy priorities webinars. So the next one is our energy one on the 18th, and you can register at the same place that you found the registration on our website. And I can also drop that in the chat. But again, thank you all for being here, and we look forward to a great next year for IEC and for Illinois. Thank you.